Welcome, listeners, to yet another FSE Radio episode. Today, we are joined by Dr. Caitlin Ryan from the Faculty of Arts. We found out about her through Sandia, our social media manager, who was given a lecture by Dr. Ryan on the topics of performative activism, volunteer tourism, and celebrity involvement in NGOs and politics. Quite a lot of ground to cover, I know, but I'll be honest, with the majority of our team coming from the Faculty of Science and Engineering, these are not the kinds of things that we would usually think about. However, it is important to do so. This is why we are here today, to spread some awareness and to show that although Miley Cyrus can sing very well and Ben Affleck makes a good-looking Batman, we should be skeptical about the promises, actions, and intentions celebrities have in the political world. Welcome, Professor Ryan. Can I call you that?
Just call me Caitlin.
Caitlin?
Yeah,
all right.
thanks.
Welcome, Caitlin. So just to start off, could you maybe explain a little bit more about yourself, how you got into this field of research, why you chose to specialize in it?
So first, thanks so much for inviting me. It's really nice to be up here at Zernica. I have a MA in Peace and Development Studies and a PhD in Peace and Development Studies. And I'm really interested in the relationship between peace and conflict as countries and societies transition out of war. What happens? And so I'm also teaching on the Development Studies minor, which is where Sandia took a course with me. And this minor kind of brings together different ways of thinking about development, and then I've tried to sort of bring my own research interests and my own personal interest in development as well into that course. But I think, I originally got into this field because I felt really, I guess, as a teenager, I felt really enraged by the world. I was just so angry at what I was seeing, and I needed some way to understand that. And it's really fortunate that you can study something like political science or peace and development studies as a way to sort of do something with that rage and to try to understand.
Very understandable.
Definitely.
For sure. I think the majority of us are mad with the state of the world right now. But you got a bachelor's in
political science.
Okay.
In the U.S.
Yeah. Okay. How did you end up in the Netherlands then?
I did my master's in Ireland, my master's and my PhD in Ireland.
Okay.
Just because I wanted to, go see something else of the world, and stayed in Europe after that.
Right. I kind of went over the topics that we might be talking about today, but is there a current field or specific area that you're really interested in or that you really want to specialize in further?
I think the thing that I find that's driving my research interest now is an interest in, we have a lot of research that demonstrates why peace building efforts fail or why development initiatives fail. It's not that we don't know what causes this failure. So I think part of what I'm interested in now is why do we keep doing the same things over and over, even though we have plenty of academic evidence that shows that these strategies are not working. And I think, this has a relationship to politics, right? It's political. The reasons that we keep doing these things over and over and over despite their failure are political reasons. So trying to understand exactly what kind of interests are at play and how these processes work and what enables us to keep doing the same wrong things over and over and over again is something that I find compelling.
What are some examples of these things we're doing wrong over and over and over again?
So I'll maybe take a really concrete example to explain. So I don't know, maybe some of your listeners, maybe some of you know about the current civil war in Sudan. This is a really awful, atrocious civil war. And it emerged out of the failure of a peace agreement between two military leaders. So the international community got together and got two leaders of two military groups to come to a power sharing agreement, it's called. And we know that power sharing agreements between military strongmen don't hold if they're not built on they don't hold because these strongmen have military interests, economic interests. The world has economic interests in Sudan. All of the different parties backing these fighters have economic interests. We have plenty of research that shows that these kinds of peace agreements aren't going to hold. And yet this was pursued as a solution in 2018, between 2014 and 2018 in Sudan, as a way to prevent another civil war, because Sudan had a civil war in the early 2000s. So this is an example of something that we keep doing, right? We keep resorting to saying, okay, we'll have a power sharing agreement between two military leaders, even though we know this doesn't work, and we're going to keep pursuing the same kinds of economic policies of extracting minerals, of taking most of the wealth out of the country, and we're going to keep doing this, and it will result in failure. So why do we keep doing these things the same way? So I don't know if that helps kind of.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, like a sociological aspect, I guess, almost psychological as well.
Yeah, and to me, I think the question that I'm almost always curious about is who benefits from this, right? And I think that tells us a lot about what interests are at play. If we ask who benefits, then we get an understanding of what interests, what kinds of economic, political interests are doing to motivate people to act in a particular way.
So Sandhya mentioned to us that you compiled the topics we are discussing today. How did you think about coming up with this niche combination? Yeah,
so this topic of celebrity involvement in development, volunteer tourism, I added this to the course. I mean, we think about development in different ways throughout the course, but I added this topic of celebrity involvement in campaigns and volunteer tourism because I think actually this is one of the first ways that my students encounter some idea of development. This is like really ubiquitous in society, right? That we see charity appeals, charity campaigns that are often, maybe they're led by a celebrity face, or we see charity appeals or charity campaigns to buy something to contribute to some sort of development project. So to me, this was a really logical thing to include in a course on development because this is often one of the first ways that we begin to form an imagination of what development is and what it does and how you can get involved in it.
Right. But what is it that is so special about celebrity involvement in, NGOs or politics?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I was in preparation for this interview. I went back and reread something that a book that I'd assigned for the class, and a quote really stuck out at me, and that is it was a quote from someone in the UN who says we sort of accept the expertise of celebrities when it comes to humanitarian appeals or development appeals. We kind of accept that they are experts. But we would not necessarily accept that they are experts in medical studies or military campaigns or engineering, right? So why is it that we sort of are willing to accept that humanitarianism or development studies is something that anyone can just kind of get involved in? So that is part of what is going on here. And then part of it is that celebrities can use their attention that they get, they can use the sort of authority that they have from their identity to gain access to places that ordinary people or even development experts wouldn't be able to access. And they can also then use that to generate attention for a cause. Because they have so much political or social kind of cachet, social capital that people recognize them and will listen to them, and then they can offer advice about helping out in the Congo or what have you, right?
Yeah. I could imagine they are very idolized, yeah. And people have a very parasocial relationship with celebrities. They seem all-knowing.
Yeah.
And what are the problems then if we give these authorities to celebrities instead of development experts or people like that?
I think, there's a few different issues that can come up. And I also want to sort of be cautious here that it's not that we should intrinsically see this as always inherently evil or bad. But let's think about what's going on here, right?
Yeah.
Oftentimes there is a simple story and a simple solution. And that's not unique to celebrities. That's kind of common across a lot of development narratives, that there's a simple story about the problem and a simple solution to it. But because celebrities have this sort of authority and appeal, it's easier for that simple story and that simple solution to catch on. So I think that's one danger, that we sort of miss the context, we miss the nuance, we miss the complexity. And I think another problem is that this often then becomes short-term attention, not necessarily from the celebrity, right? Like, so, some of these celebrities have been involved in particular things for a long period of time, but it sort of engenders short-term attention from us as a public, right?
Yeah, okay.
That we see this, we might see this in social media or we see this on TV, and it catches our attention for a short period of time. So we think then, oh, well, this is the most important thing in the world right now. And then 6 months later, our attention turns somewhere else. So I think the attention span that it generates from us is also part of what is going on here. And then I think there's then because of this combination of things, the solutions that are offered tend not to be long-term structural solutions that get at the root of some of the complex issues that are going on.
Right. Yeah, I have noticed that as well, where there's something really prominent in the news for maybe like a couple months, 3 maybe as well. But, and then it immediately shifts to something completely different. And it's always hard to keep up almost. So yeah, niche involvement in those categories, I guess, would make like a lot of sense in each like kind of conflict.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we talked briefly about NGOs. We've mentioned them a little bit. So maybe in very simple terms, could you maybe explain why they exist?
Yeah,
what they are.
That's
what
a
they
great
are,
question.
Yeah.
We shouldn't assume that everyone knows.
Yeah.
So NGO stands for non-governmental organization. This is a really broad umbrella term. And it applies to all sorts of different organizations. Some of them are only active in one country, right? So there are NGOs in the Netherlands that are only active in the Netherlands. There are NGOs in the Netherlands that are also active abroad. And we can think of them as sort of an organization or an agency that sometimes interacts between a state and society or citizens, right? Or sometimes they act between society and citizens and some other donor agency, some other international agency like the UN, the United Nations, or the World Bank. And NGOs will always have like a particular objective because they can't solve every problem in every way. So they'll have a particular set of problems that they work on, that they are motivated to solve. They're staffed by people who have some sort of expertise in that kind of issue or that kind of problem. When we're talking about development NGOs, oftentimes the staff is comprised both of international staff that are maybe working in head offices in Brussels or Amsterdam with local offices in other places, and then local staff who are coming from that context. And they do everything from helping communities in a development context, everything from helping communities install water pumps to healthcare provision to education campaigns. So they do all sorts of things that contribute to social economic development. And they emerged there's a long history to why they emerged that we don't necessarily have time to go into. But I think what is worth saying is that oftentimes they fill a gap that states are not filling. And the more and more the international community and states sort of step back from taking responsibility for economic and social development in their country, the more NGOs step in. So there was a period of time in the 1980s where the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund said, okay, well, you have to have less state-owned enterprises. You have to spend less money on social welfare. You need to do less spending as a state. You need to have less state employees. And this happened all over the globe, right? And this was one moment that NGOs then really stepped in to fill that kind of gap of the state. or in a state emerging from conflict where the state might not be particularly effective or particularly strong, often NGOs are filling that role. And so then I think that leaves a question about like why are we not actually putting more responsibility on the state to fill these functions? We're sort of accepting that NGOs are going to fill this gap, but why? Why are we expecting that NGOs are going to fill this gap rather than saying, well, actually, these kind of developmental questions are the responsibility of states?
It sounds like a very positive thing that they are filling these gaps. Are there any certain downsides, like big downsides to NGOs?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of building on what I've said, the downside is then that the more you responsibilize NGOs, the more you take that responsibility away from the state. And I think that has an effect on democracy as well, right? Because if the state is not responsible to its citizens to ensure healthcare, education, infrastructure, if that state does not necessarily have to uphold that responsibility, what happens to citizens' expectations of states? What happens to democracy? And I mean, this is sort of a bigger question. And then I think another thing, so it kind of limits accountability as well, right? Because NGOs are less accountable to citizens than they are to sort of maybe their board of directors or their international office, right? They have accountability, but what that direction of accountability usually goes upwards rather than downwards to beneficiaries. Whereas in a democratic society, we expect that states should be responsible to their citizens. There's kind of this question of to whom are NGOs accountable? And that doesn't mean, right, I also want, they're doing things that are important and good and that need to be done. And so the question is who should be doing them?
Do you think that because NGOs are filling this gap, the states are retreating? Or is it because the states are already retreating and then the NGOs can fill this gap? What is the cause?
It's a vicious cycle, right?
Yeah,
so there's a gap and NGOs fill them, and as NGOs fill them, the state doesn't have to, and as the state doesn't have to, NGOs continue to fill a gap. So it's a vicious cycle. I wouldn't say that there's a single line of causality there, right? It's a vicious cycle.
Okay.
I was going to say as well, sorry. Could you draw parallels between maybe the way that when states lose responsibility and then NGOs kind of take that on, and the way that now celebrities are taking on kind of this authority role in the public sphere of being the ones to kind of push these out and hold that kind of public authority?
That's a great, I think you can definitely create a connection there. And I think one way to see that connection as well is that because NGOs are then competing for funding. They're often competing for funding with each other. And so celebrity involvement is a way to generate attention that can generate funding. And oftentimes some of that funding is like small funding that citizens will then contribute because they see Batman in the Congo and they want to get involved. But some of that is actually like large scale philanthropy. And so there's this idea of kind of the credibility of I keep, reverting to Ben Affleck and the Batman reference. There's this credibility of Batman and Batman's initiative in the Congo, and then you can see philanthropists who are then in some way connected to celebrities, right? Because there's a lot of maybe some celebrities are then not active in their own campaigns, but they're giving money, they're donating money to their friends' campaigns, right? So I think one connection that you see there is that as NGOs are taking more responsibility and they're competing for funding, celebrities become a way to generate funding, not just through small donations, but through philanthropic donations. And I guess I could have explained that Batman in the Congo refers to Ben Affleck's Eastern Congo initiative, which is an initiative that he started in the context of a really complex conflict and crisis in Eastern Congo. And his Eastern Congo initiative was aimed at bringing private enterprise into cooperation with local farmers in Eastern DRC to provide a stronger economic base for people to engage in non-mineral, so not extracting coltan and cobalt, non-mineral livelihoods activities.
Yeah, and I feel like when we talk about Ben Affleck, for example, like it would maybe celebrity involvement helps gain the public's trust, or what kind of effect does that have if if they're trying to help NGOs build funding and create more funding?
Maybe so. I'm not sure that I would use the word trust, but affinity, right? Like we want to feel like we are with celebrities. We want to feel like if they think this is important, then I think this is important too, right? So I'm not. There's an emotion there, but I don't know is it a feeling of trust so much as it is a feeling of affinity. And celebrities are really good at creating feelings of affinity.
Right.
Are there steps being taken to shift this kind of attention from celebrities or NGOs towards a more structural change in developing countries?
No, things are definitely getting worse, and I think that we can see that with the Trump administration and his dismantling of the United States' bilateral aid agency. USAID was completely dismantled this spring, and I think we see other countries sort of following suit and stepping back their own development aid projects, which means that actually philanthropic donations to NGOs are becoming more and more important, and NGOs and aid agencies are doing more and more and more to try to attract philanthropic donations. I was having a conversation about this with a colleague about a week ago about how if we can no longer count on governments in Europe or in the United States or Canada to put money into development programs, we need to turn to philanthropic sources of income. So I think this is actually only going to accelerate as we de-responsibilize states for engaging in development questions.
And how do we keep it from accelerating? Is there possibilities there?
Yeah, we're citizens of democracies, more or less, right?
Yeah.
So that's our responsibility. Our responsibility is as citizens to think about what are the foreign policies of our governments, and who are we electing, and what kinds of foreign policy objectives do they have? So I think that's our primary responsibility as citizens.
How can we as audience better distinguish between a genuine I'm supporting structural change, or I'm just supporting something quick that doesn't matter?
That's a great question. And, that I think I even see I've thought about this a lot. I do research on this topic. I've been in developing countries where I've seen what development projects do or don't do, and I still feel like an emotional attachment to particular campaigns at particular moments, right? So then the question is, I think, a matter of reflecting on what is your emotional reaction to this particular thing? What emotion do you feel when you're asked to donate to a particular campaign or act on a particular campaign? And then to think about what is that emotion doing? And where does that come from, and what's behind it? And then to find out more, right? And ideally, to you, especially now that you're students, you have access to an enormous body of research through the library, right? So you can do a little more to find out a little bit more about what is actually going on here, right? What do we know? What research has been done about the particular dynamics of this particular thing? And that can give you a better sense of what is this campaign saying it's going to do, and what might its effects do, and what are the sort of historical contexts in which this is taking place, right? So in that sense, it's a matter in two ways of slowing down, right? Slowing down our reaction by thinking about what emotion is behind this, and slowing down in terms of getting trying to get a deeper understanding.
I think this might just be me, I don't know, but for some reason that makes me think of there was a recent kind of viral moment from Billie Eilish, the singer, obviously. And she was calling out billionaires at this fund or gala or something for not donating more. And she announced that she was donating, I think it was $11 million or something to different organizations. And obviously she got so much support for that. But then, and correct me if I'm wrong, fact check this yourself, listeners. But when I was reading about the actual details of it, it wasn't directly coming from her. She wasn't actually donating herself. It was fans who were going to her concerts and then buying more expensive tickets that are change maker tickets. So it's to me, I was so you say you're donating, but it's not necessarily. It's interesting wording to put it mildly, but I do agree with going into it deeply and finding out the details for yourself is the important thing, because you can look at it just the headline and say, oh, that's great, but then if you see, oh, it's just coming from tickets that people are choosing to pay more for.
And where it's going to, we also don't know, right? So
yeah, exactly. It
Yeah,
was to a myriad of different organizations, I think. But yeah, I think that's really important. I agree.
Yeah, slow down. Like we're bombarded with we're bombarded with so much all the time, right? There's so much going on. We're bombarded with so much. There's so many things on social. Like slow down. Like, and then you can, that's not to say that you shouldn't get involved or that you shouldn't donate or that you shouldn't take action, right? There's a organization that I donate to every month, and I have for years, and I'll keep doing it. And so think about, also think about like the difference between donating €5 at a go, or the difference between becoming like helping an organization to sustain over a longer period of time. And I know that as students that's super hard, right? You're on a budget, but making a sustained donation to a campaign over or to an organization over a longer period of time, where you donate kind of a certain amount every month, rather than just, oh, I'm going to here and then here and then here and then here, makes a difference to that organization's planning as well.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
because then maybe these small things are very marketable and very I want to get this quick money instead of like consistently getting change into this, right?
Yeah, bingo. They're marketable.
Yeah.
And that comes down to like it's also marketable for Billie Eilish or whoever, right? Like we see this all sorts of ways to spend a little bit more on this thing that you're going to buy anyway, and it goes to a good cause. That's really marketable. That's really, really marketable. The smart technique, right? But then let's think about what's behind that. What is it doing?
Yeah, I feel like you always see celebrities donating or being with NGOs when they have like a new movie coming out. It's part of the press cycle at this point, I feel like, for them.
Is it really detrimental when you have a really big campaign going or a celebrity that is very, very involved, and then let's say the news changes to a completely different conflict, a certain NGO maybe is not receiving as much funding anymore. So is there like a really big downside to this spike? There's
definitely a downside to this spike. And I think one way that it manifests is that, and this is not, NGOs often have to plan short-term projects because of funding cycles. So then that constrains what they can actually do, right? So if rather than thinking about, okay, we're going to invest in this project over the next 20 years, it's what can we do in 18 months? And 6 months of that is some sort of reporting and evaluation. So 12 months of it is actually the project itself. And this is a reflection of the ways in which funding cycles work then shape the kinds of projects that happen, right? So if we define things as a problem that NGOs and charities need to solve, and then we'll put funding into it, that shapes the way these projects are designed and what they're able to do. And I think that this is something that I would assume that if you had a bunch of different NGOs from different countries in here talking to you, they would mention something about what this project cycle and funding cycle does to limit their capacity to think in a long term, to think about structural problems, to think about like meaningful partnership with communities that they're engaged in.
Right. Yeah. And I remember you mentioned that NGOs compete for funding.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess if a lot of funding might be going to one particular NGO, would that kind of hinder the funding that the others might get? Especially if like a celebrity is very, very involved with a particular organization.
Yeah, I think it's maybe about the like a sudden flow of money and then it's going to stop. Right? I think it's just a bigger question of how do we fund development? Like how do we put money into development? Where does it go? And I think celebrity campaigns, and I will say, like, I should say something positive about Batman in the Congo, is that there's some of the research on his initiative suggests that he did have sort of a longer term, a vision for longer term engagement and more sustainable engagement, and so not all celebrity campaigns are the same as well, right? That some of them are thinking about these time frames and these time spans of engagement and wanting not to just sort of fly in and fly out again, right? So they're not all, we shouldn't paint them all with the same brush. They're not all the same.
There's an extract I read from a text you provided, I think, for the lecture, where it said that Ben Affleck, Batman, that his involvement in the Eastern Congo initiative ended up being very greatly rooted in colonialism. So, presenting the Congo as being in need of humanitarian aid from like foreign countries. What do you think about that, actually?
Yeah, I think it's really difficult to overcome colonial legacies of how we think about the rest of the world. And so this is where it gets tricky, right? Because we often think that feelings of wanting to help are always inherently altruistic, but sometimes that feeling of wanting to help comes from a feeling of, even if you like a very, very deeply ingrained implicit feeling of superiority that we somehow know how to fix this problem. That we are somehow the ones that are able and capable of bringing the expertise, that you just haven't figured it out yet. We're here to help. And there can be altruism in that, but there's also often this idea behind an idea of helping or saving someone, some feeling that you are the one that can do the helping or the saving, and that the other person is the one that needs to be helped or saved. And we have to think about what kinds of power relations are at play there. And I think that it's, those are difficult legacies to overcome. And so it's a matter of reflecting about it and thinking about, well, something as well that I was thinking about in preparing for this was how do we portray the agency of others? So if we portray them as not being able to help themselves, or if we portray them as not being capable of helping themselves, that diminishes their agency. Or if we portray them as actors who kind of only have agency as economic actors, right? So they only have agency insofar as they can be farmers to grow cocoa to sell to some Seattle-based chocolate company, right? That might treat them as agents, but it only treats them as economic agents, and it sort of diminishes the real complexity of themselves as people beyond just economic actors.
Right. You also mentioned performative activism in the lecture. So I assume this is in relation to celebrities, or the way that you were explaining it. Could you maybe kind of explain what that would mean?
Yeah, I mean, celebrities can do it, maybe like the Billie Eilish example that you mentioned that I hadn't heard about, actually, because I'm actually not on social media.
Good.
But I think especially from what I know about social media, right? Like this is also about kind of influencers can also do this, right? And we can also do this too, right? So I linked this to the example of volunteer tourism, that if kind of one of the underlying objectives of helping is to then perform your helpingness for a different audience, this is performative activism. So this is not just about celebrities. This is about how we sort of perform our helping so that we can show other people that we are helping. And so it's not just celebrities. It might be influencers. It might just be ordinary people who are helping in some way that is more performative than meaningful.
You mentioned volunteer tourism. Can you explain what it means? Because maybe listeners don't know.
People are probably familiar with the idea, but maybe not the terminology. So if you go somewhere as a tourist and then you say, okay, well, I want to do something that helps as well, I'm going to volunteer. And sometimes this is in the form of like gap year things that people do. Sometimes it's in the form of just shorter term travel that may be on top of your tourist trip to Southeast Asia or somewhere in Sub-Saharan Africa or Latin America. You link up with some agency that looks for traveling volunteers, then you end up doing something like helping to build a school. I'm using scare quotes here, or working in an orphanage, or God forbid, working in a health clinic, or doing something else that is volunteering alongside your tourism.
So you would say that performative activism resembles volunteer tourism in a certain way?
Not necessarily, right? Like you can be a volunteer or tourist without the performative activism, right? Yeah. So they're not mutually exclusive. Mm-hmm. But when you are a volunteer tourist and then you use that as a way to sort of platform yourself.
Okay, so personal motivation over local needs are actually...
Yeah, and you might not even be aware that you might not be doing that like maliciously as such, right? You might have intentions that are valid and you're doing this volunteer tourism, but then a lot of the time that you're spending there, you're then posting on whatever social media platform about what you're doing, and you're drawing attention to yourself as doing the thing rather than just doing the thing.
And I guess with volunteer tourism also, it's again with feeling like you're gonna help them and you know how this works and you're gonna help them. This applies here as well, right?
It can apply here as well, right? And I think another article that we read for this class talks about some of them. It interviews volunteer tourists in Southeast Asia about their kind of feelings about why they're doing this and what they think they're doing. And it sort of reflects an idea that it reflects some complexity, right? So their consciousness is being raised. They're learning about the world. They're gaining a deeper understanding of the world that they might not have had previously, and so that's really good. But sometimes they're also treating the poverty as something that represents an authentic culture of the place, right? So they're saying things like, well, we don't want them to modernize too much because then they won't be themselves anymore, right? Yeah. We don't, it's okay if they modernize a little bit, but we don't want them to become too much like us. So what does that mean? We don't want them to have electricity and running water and toilets because then they will lose their culture, right? So treating poverty as something that represents like an authentic part of culture. So we're there to help them, but we don't want to help them too much because then, they're just going to become kind of like us. And I think another way this manifests is the idea that regardless of the actual skills and knowledge and expertise you have, you can be helpful just by the fact that you come from the global north. So the fact, the idea that we just sort of think inherently any 19-year-old coming from Western Europe going to Southeast Asia can teach English because they speak English, right? Why do we think that? Like there's if I went to a school in Groningen and said, I speak English, can I teach these 5-year-olds how to speak English? That would be unacceptable, right? I don't have any qualification to teach English. But we sort of assume that because of the different context, 19-year-olds who speak English can go teach English in Southeast Asia, for example, right? And so that sort of replicates the idea that one has the authority and expertise to help on the basis of one's identity, which then links back to the celebrity tourism.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Do you feel like people that are that have more power in the world kind of control the fact that these developing countries still don't have electricity or running water? So is there kind of a non-cultural perspective to how we see them, or?
This is exactly what I mean. My starting point would be that the economic inequalities in the world are choices that we have made. They're not natural facts of the world. Mm-hmm. These reflect political and economic choices that we have made. And I don't necessarily mean that we in this room, but the point is here that there is agency in the way that the world order has been established. This is not just fallen out of the sky. It's not gravity. So we then can think about what are the systems that are keeping that in place, that inequality in place, that difference in place. what are the interests that actually want to keep those inequalities in place. It's not. In countries where I've worked, it's not accidental that electricity rates in the rural parts of the country are 10%. That's not an accident. Like, those reflect very real political and economic choices that have been made, not just in those countries themselves, but in other parts of the world, right?
So in that case, how effective do you think NGOs are in reaching their goals?
I mean, they might be effective in reaching a small scale reduction in things like electrification or sanitation, right? And we should not diminish those things, right? Like, if as the result of an NGO project, a number of families have electricity when they didn't previously, or a number of families have sanitation when they didn't previously, that means something. Like, that is, in fact, meaningful. Yeah. It makes a discernible difference for the lives of those people, and we shouldn't diminish that. And then the question is, like, what are the things that are preventing that from actually being structural change rather than small scale change? There needs to be a balance between thinking about what are the structural causes of these problems, and how do we tackle those structural causes, but in the meantime, what can we do to sort of chip away at sort of day-to-day experiences of poverty and inequality, so that can also, like, galvanize action, right? It comes back to one positive element of volunteer tourism. If you become aware and more conscious of how the rest of the world lives, maybe that does start to shape your view about what is possible, what can be done, what are the historical reasons that things are this way, right? There are sort of, it's necessary to also think about how can we act, what can we do, otherwise we become totally overwhelmed by the idea that this is just inescapable.
I feel like that also ties back into the idea of slowing down, right? And kind of, and I think maybe as well with volunteer tourism. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, I think so. There are ways that you can volunteer meaningfully, and then how maybe think about doing that more slowly or over a longer period of time, or where you live rather than going somewhere else. I think connecting that to slowing down is a good way to think about that, or going back to the same place again and again, rather than saying, okay, well, on top of my month trip to Southeast Asia, I spent a week constructing a school. What does that might give a sort of short-term feeling of I constructed a school, but slowing down, thinking in a longer term might have a different effect.
Yeah. I was curious about the internal conflicts we might have when donating to certain organizations. So are we doing it out of pity, or are we genuinely there to help? And do we genuinely care about the cause that they care about? I feel like it might go down to that as well. What do you think about that, actually?
Yeah, I think reflecting on, like, having some self-reflection, and again, coming back to, like, do you quickly click on something to donate, or do you think about what is motivating you to do this, and is there another way that you can have a better effect, right? And I think thinking about your motivation is important, right? So when I think about why do I donate to a particular organization every month, it is kind of a coexisting feeling of rage that this organization has to exist in the first place. Like, so rage at the underlying structural conditions that have made it necessary for this organization to exist. And then research into what they do and how they do it and how they work, and sort of a belief that what they are doing is sort of chipping away at day-to-day experiences of pain and hardship, right? So what is your motivation, and what is it doing to get you to donate in a particular way? And then, like, having enough knowledge of that organization to know that actually this is not going to change the structural conditions, but it might do something, right?
Yeah.
Slow down, think.
That's slow down.
Educate yourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there then a way that audiences can kind of distinguish between genuine advocacy and performative activism?
I think that's a really hard question because it kind of gets to the broader difficulty that we have now between discerning, motivations in kind of a social media age, right? This is a broader problem. This is a broader question. But yeah, I think, again, it's a matter of taking a little bit of time to do a bit of research to think a little bit about what is going on here, right? Like, so to me, advocacy would mean sort of centering the people, like the voices and the opinions and the views and the needs of the people who you claim to be talking for. And performativity is more self-centering, I think, is maybe one way to begin to distinguish, right? So if one's self or one's persona or one's celebrity brand is at the center of that campaign, to me, that's less about advocacy. And if there's sort of evidence that the desires and wishes and knowledge and expertise of the people who you're advocating for are at the center, and that it's taking place over a longer period of time and shows kind of more contextually based understanding of what's going on, then that, advocacy campaigns can be really important. They do important things. So being able to distinguish between them and a performative activism is important, but I think not easy.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Also ties back to social media, and that makes it difficult to see people's intentions and stuff. Yeah.
And with the amount of influencers.
Yeah.
God, sorry, it's snowing.
First snow of the year,
Oh,
I think.
Very exciting.
I was going to ask as well, tying back to kind of the idea of volunteer tourism and going abroad and things. Would you say that it's better to always help locally? Is that always the case, or not necessarily?
Not necessarily. No, I mean, I think helping locally is something that you can think about as your day-to-day, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it would be unfair of me to say not to go abroad. Like, I've learned so much by the immense privilege of going to other places and learning from people. Like, it would be really unfair of me to say, no, you can't ever go anywhere, right? Like, no, you should go, like, go see, go learn, go see other parts of the world. And then to think about what is your motivation to do so. And most importantly, how do you act, right?
Mm-hmm.
How acting, coming to a place with the full knowledge that you know nothing, right? Acting humble, acting grateful to be there, the sort of your behavior and your attitude, I think, is super important, right? But no, go out and see things, go out and meet people. Like, if you have the privilege to go, then that's something, you can think about that also as a responsibility to use that privilege well.
It reminds me a lot of Anthony Bourdain, almost that like wisdom of going and just being open to learn.
Yeah, I love Anthony Bourdain, like his attitude of just, and I think like it came, I think, from a deep love of people, right? So like if you love people especially, right? Like, go out and like be honest in that love of people, and that will reflect in the way you interact with them and the way you present yourself and the way you comport yourself.
Definitely.
You mentioned you were talking so passionately about traveling the world. I think maybe as a final question, what is the best place you visited? What is maybe a place that really inspired you?
Or I've learned most from, maybe.
So I've been working in West Africa, specifically Liberia and Sierra Leone, for the last like more than 10 years.
Wow.
Off and on, like I don't necessarily get to go every year, but I really love both of those countries, and the more I go there, the more I develop relationships with people, the more I love them, the more it's a privilege to go back and to have kind of long-term relations with people and place. And I don't know if any of you are studying like engineering, for instance, or maybe engineers, but like the sheer ingenuity that arises out of having to find solutions to problems, when you don't have everything at hand, right? Finding solutions with what you have, I think this shows like a degree of like creativity and mental flexibility and intelligence, and that I really love to watch. I love the food. People are, really good humored and really funny, and they're really marvelous, beautiful countries.
Very beautiful.
That's so nice.
Yeah, that's very nice to hear. All right. Thank you so much, Caitlin, for being on the podcast with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. And see you, or I hope you listen to us next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.